The rain began at dusk. At first it was only a hush in the distant woods, like countless feet hurrying across dead leaves. Then the sound climbed over the truck's canvas, crossed the yard of sky, and struck the corrugated metal roof above Anna Kramer's head, turning into a dense, relentless hammering that argued with nothing. Anna sat in the bed of the truck, where water beaded along the edge of the tarp and ran in thin lines, soaking the corners of the small wooden box on her knees. Inside were tincture of iodine, gauze, a few bottles of pain tablets, a rubber tourniquet meant for snakebite first aid, a fine ink pen, a small glass tube with a movable dark marker inside, and a brand new hardbound registry book. That was all her equipment, and the only solid thing she could hold on to. The truck bucked and skidded through mud, then lurched to a stop. When the engine died, the world narrowed to two sounds: rain snapping on tin, and, from every side, the wet, heavy chorus of frogs and insects. "Out! Bring your things!" The escorting soldier was young. Beneath his rain hood, half his face showed without expression. Anna hugged the box and climbed down. Mud swallowed her ankles at once, cold and slick, the sensation shooting up her legs. Ahead stood a few rows of low tin-roofed sheds leaning in knee-high sawgrass. A black, cloudy drainage ditch ran along the sheds. Under the downpour, it had nearly risen level with the ground, breathing out a sweet, fishy stink of rot mixed with something chemical. This was the detachment post, not the camp she had imagined with watchtowers and endless wire, more like a patch the swamp had grudgingly coughed up after trying to swallow it whole. Rain clung to her skin like a cold cloth, yet heat steamed up from the air itself, a tug between chill and swelter that made her lightheaded in waves. They led her to the last shed at the far edge. Inside it was bare. 2 rough bunks, a wobbly table, and bundles of unopened mosquito netting stacked in the corner. Under this roof the rain sounded even louder, each drop a blow that seemed to land inside her ears. She set the wooden box down and stood as water seeped through the cracks and dampened her shoulders and back. No one questioned her, no one shouted, no one even looked at her twice. Nature filled the air with sound, yet among people there was an absolute blank. That blankness frightened her more than the hostility she had expected. She had assumed her status as a prisoner of war would burn on her forehead, invite immediate humiliation or revenge. In this swamp, far from Europe, any cruelty could be blamed on weather, disease, or wartime necessity. She pulled the box tight against her chest until her nails bit the wood. The box was her last thread to who she had been, a German rear area medical orderly, and the only proof left that she might still be of some use. The silence chewed at her nerves, small and persistent because it left her with nothing to fight against and nothing to bargain with. After a time, the rain eased into a steady drizzle. The door opened, dragging in the heavier smell of wet earth. 2 men entered. In front was a middle-aged man in a U.S. Army uniform with sleeves rolled to the elbows, lean-faced, eyes calm in a way that felt measured. He carried a clipboard and a canteen. Behind him came a broad man in civilian work clothes, trousers splattered with mud, brow knotted as he kept sizing up Anna and the box. The soldier's gaze dropped to Anna's hands gripping the box, then lifted. In accented but clear German, he said, "I'm the medical sergeant here." Robert Miller. He did not wait for an answer, and he did not introduce the civilian. He stepped closer, unscrewed the canteen, and held it out. "Hydrate first," he said, flat like a step in a procedure. "Then we talk." Anna froze. She had imagined a search, an interrogation, a rough inspection, being shoved into mud. Not this. She hesitated and did not take the canteen. Miller moved it half an inch closer and held it there. He stopped speaking. He simply looked at her. Rain and sweat slid down Anna's temple. Her throat was dry enough to hurt. In the end, her body's need beat everything else. She loosened one hand from the box and took the canteen. The water was warm and faintly of bleach, yet it ran down her throat like a gift. She drank too fast and nearly choked. "Slow," Miller said. When she finished, he capped the canteen and set the clipboard on the table. "Routine physical. Stand where the light is better." The exam was mechanical and thorough. He checked temperature and pulse, shone a flashlight into her eyes and mouth, asked about fever, chills, severe diarrhea, rash. While he worked, the civilian foreman waited in the doorway with folded arms, impatience tightening his face. "All right," Miller wrote down the last entry, then pointed to the bundled netting. "That's yours. One per person. I'll show you how to hang it." His eyes passed over the faded bruising on Anna's wrist from transport, but he said nothing. He pulled a small roll of tape from his satchel, tore off 2 strips, and gestured for Anna to set the medicine box on the table. She obeyed. Miller snapped the clasp shut and crossed the 2 strips of red tape over it into a clear X. On the tape he wrote in pencil, fast and clean, 44-09-15 and a serial number. "What is that?" Anna asked. "A seal," Miller said, pushing the box back. "Next time you open it, I need to be present, or you need written authorization. When you're done, you reseal it, write the new date, and record the inventory change. It's not to catch you, it's to make every issue and every consumption traceable." The foreman finally spoke in fast English. Miller listened, then translated into German, still level. "Mr. Jones says the ditch out back is clogged. If it isn't cleared, the next heavy rain will flood the barracks. He needs hands now. He wants you to take suitable people over there this afternoon. He says breaks can be shortened. Water will be delivered." Anna's stomach dropped. She looked toward the window. The rain had thinned, but the sky was still leaden, and the ground already had the look of a basin. She knew what happened when tired, unacclimated bodies were pushed into wet labor for hours. Heat injury, falls, infections, worse. This was the brutality she had expected, justified by necessity. She waited for Miller to yield or to shrug and say there was no choice. Miller did not answer at once. He went to the window, watched the mud outside, then pulled a small metal instrument from his pocket and checked it in the doorway light, a thermometer and hygrometer. He spoke to Jones in English. The tone stayed steady, but whatever he said drained color from the foreman's face. Anna caught words like temperature, humidity, protocol, dehydration risk. Miller turned back. With these readings and this mud, long-duration ditch work does not meet safety protocol. Risk is too high. He counted on his fingers. A shaded water station at the site so each person can drink the required amount per hour. A fixed rotation, 45 minutes work, 15 minutes mandatory rest in shade. An observer to watch for heat injury or collapse. Until those conditions are met, I cannot approve starting. Jones argued, voice rising, gesturing toward the ditch and the sky, as if time itself were a weapon. Miller listened, then shook his head and said one short sentence in English. Miller faced Anna again. If basic medical and safety conditions aren't met, the medical section can require a halt. That is protocol. For a few seconds, the shed went still under the rain. Jones stared at Miller, then at Anna and the bright red seal. His jaw worked. At last he stormed out and slammed the door. Miller seemed unsurprised. He made a note on his clipboard, then looked at Anna. The water station will be set before lunch. I'll give you the rotation schedule this afternoon. Now the knot. Malaria prevention is one of the top priorities here. Anna stood with the sealed box under her arm and tried to fit what had just happened into the story she had brought with her. A canteen offered without mockery, a full physical exam completed without insult, a red X that turned her supplies into an accountable system, a quick glance at numbers on a small instrument, and then a refusal delivered as if it were a measurement rather than a personal dispute. The punishment she had expected did not arrive. What arrived was procedure, a kind of barrier built from data and clauses. It was unfamiliar, and it felt harder than comfort, but it stood between bodies and the easy mistakes people made when they were tired, hurried, and willing to gamble with someone else's health. He lifted the heavy netting, treated with repellent that gave off a faint chemical odor, threaded one corner through a wedge on the bunk, and wrapped, passed, and pulled with fast fingers until a firm, flat knot appeared. The net stretched tight, hanging well above the mud. All four corners level. Pull it tight off the ground, he said. Air has to move. If the net sags, mosquitoes find gaps, and you can't breathe. He pressed the mesh below the knot. When you inspect, the dip can't be more than a finger. If one corner droops, you redo it. Anna tried the next corner. Her hands were clumsy in a way that did not feel like her own. She looped and failed, then tried again. Miller did not hurry her. He did not take over. He watched. Only when she tightened a knot, still a little soft, did he give a small nod. Practice. Then he left to check the other sheds. Anna stood by the bunk and looked at the two knots side by side, his precise and rock solid, hers slightly slack. The difference measured the distance between her and this new world. It was not only a matter of language or uniforms, it was technique, habit, and an insistence on doing a thing the same way every time. That distance was filled day by day with concrete routine. The medicine box became the center. Each morning Miller came to the medical shed, checked the red seal with Anna, then broke it himself or authorized her to do so. The shed was only larger tin and plank, but it held exam cots and cabinets, and it held a kind of order. Supplies were scarce, damp was constant, and nothing could be allowed to disappear into the swamp without leaving a mark in ink. The seal routine became as strict as the netting routine. If Anna needed a single gauze pad, she did not simply reach into the box. The seal had to be checked, the tape cut cleanly, the clasp opened in Miller's presence or under his written authorization. When the item was issued, the ledger had to show the date, the person, the reason, the quantity. Then a new red X went on with a new date, a new number. At first it felt like an accusation. Over time it became a rhythm. It meant the box was not a private possession that could vanish or be blamed on rumor. It meant every change could be followed backward to a hand in a moment. The registry book was the hinge of everything. The damp air made ink bleed into blur. Miller gave her blotting sheets. After each line, press it. Anna did. It began as a mechanical habit, like tightening a knot. Days later, she noticed blue-black stains along the blotting paper's edge, where her thumb and index finger pressed again and again. The whorls of her fingerprints began to show. She stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. and then realized they were unmistakably hers. Miller, counting used gauze nearby, saw what she was staring at and said evenly, "Responsibility leaves marks. Better that way. No one can erase them." She learned the pen and the glass tube's purpose in a hurry. One day an Italian POW hauling lumber through sawgrass was carried in, panicked, swearing a snake had bitten his ankle. Miller examined the wound, then drew a clean circle along the swelling's edge and wrote the time, 14:27. He placed the glass tube at the highest bulge, aligned its sliding marker, and drew a short line on the tube's surface to match it. "Every 15 minutes, redraw the edge and note it," he told Anna. "Move the marker if height changes. Time matters. Swelling speed guides medication, and whether evacuation is needed, guessing and panic are useless. Marks and numbers are useful." As the minutes passed, Anna watched the edge of the swelling, watched the small changes, watched how a frantic situation turned under Miller's hands into a sequence of checks. Later, the bite proved not deadly. The man recovered, but Anna kept seeing the time and the marching lines. Fear turned into steps that could be measured and acted upon. Malaria prevention was another war, silent and constant, and its discipline was stricter than anything she had known in rear hospitals. The card itself was crude, but its authority was not. Green meant a man could go out with a shovel. Yellow meant he became a problem to be watched, not a worker to be used. Red meant the day ended, regardless of shouting or schedules. Each morning the line formed in the damp air. Thermometers were wiped, tongues checked, questions repeated until the answers were no longer evasions. Men who wanted to work stayed quiet about headaches. Men who wanted to hide tried to invent them. Anna learned to listen for the texture of a reply, the way a voice carried through fatigue, the way skin looked when fever was just beginning. She learned to trust numbers when faces lied. On the wall, Miller nailed a hand-drawn card with 3 zones: green, cleared for work; yellow, symptoms and recheck; red, mandatory, stop, and isolation. Before labor each day, the camp lined up outside the medical shed. Anna or Miller watched faces, asked about headache and chills, took temperatures when needed. A yellow mark excused a man to a designated rest shed with water and scheduled retesting. A red mark sent him to 2 isolation huts set away from the main sheds, where a designated runner delivered water and basic food, and where temperature checks continued on a fixed schedule. Miller did not bend. "Malaria isn't personal luck," he told Anna after escorting a young man shaking with chills to isolation. "It's public health. If it spreads here, no one controls it. We hold the line here, or we lose it everywhere in the camp." Order did not stop at the wire. One afternoon, noise rose near the road. Voices, whistles, bursts of laughter that turned sharp. Anna was distributing salt tablets when she saw a crowd of local townspeople gathered outside the fence, pointing at the POW labor line and shouting slurs. The words that drifted in were muddy but clear enough: Nazi, pigsty, hang them. A ripple ran through the work detail. Some men lowered their heads, some tightened their grip on tools. Steps went out of rhythm. Jones stood aside with arms crossed, watching as if it were entertainment. A jeep arrived hard, throwing mud, and braked so sharply it rocked. 2 military police jumped out with an Army lieutenant responsible for security. He strode to the wire and addressed the crowd, not loud but clear. This is a military-controlled area. Gathering and interference are violations. Step back beyond the highway signpost. No insults, no throwing objects, no gestures, no approaching the wire. Violators will be identified and ordered to leave. Repeat offenders will be referred to local law enforcement. The lieutenant did not shout. He only stated rules and consequence. The MPs stood on either side, hands near holsters, eyes alert. Laughter died. The crowd muttered and retreated to the line. The lieutenant watched a few moments longer, confirming no one drifted forward again, then nodded and climbed back into the Jeep. Within minutes, the camp edge went quiet again, leaving only tools striking earth. Jones clicked his tongue and walked away. Anna stood holding tablets she had not finished distributing. The confrontation she had expected never happened. A line had been drawn and enforced. She could not tell whether it served comfort, convenience, or something else, but she could feel that the people on this side of the wire had been protected from being reduced to a target for hatred. Afterward, she kept thinking about the lieutenant's tone. He had not argued that the prisoners deserved mercy. He had not demanded sympathy. He had simply insisted that certain behaviors were prohibited and then made those prohibitions real. The effect was immediate. The work line steadied, shoulders lowered, the air around the fence lost its charged edge. She began to understand that the rule did not have to be warm to be protective. The real test came days later with another storm. Rain poured through the night as if the sky had split open. The ditch swelled and overflowed, spilling into a sheet of murk across the yard. Water pooled around the sheds, above shoes in the rows, in low spots forming small ponds that reflected a sky the color of old tin. When it finally stopped, Jones waded through muck into the medical shed, face darker than the weather. The ditch has to be cleared, now. His voice was nearly a shout. The water's high, it'll wash silt out. If we wait, the mud cakes. Everybody goes in today. Pull the blockages, open the flow. No time for arguments. Anna looked out. The ditch still ran fast, carrying grass and trash. The bank was slick, slurry. Going in would mean slips, unseen cuts, men knocked down by current. She looked at Miller. Miller went to the window, watched the current, then turned back. No. Ground traction is beyond safety limits. Water speed is too high. Conditions under the surface are unknown. Wading work is prohibited under protocol in these conditions. If someone goes down, rescue will be extremely difficult. Jones flared. By your safety standards, nothing gets done. This is an order. The schedule can't wait. My medical safety assessment is part of the order set, Miller said, calm and immovable, each word landing without ornament. Labor can shift to controllable risk tasks, cut sawgrass on higher ground to reduce mosquito habitat, move supplies from low areas to dry storage, place hazard markers in flooded sections. Necessary work, not this. Jones sneered. Miller poured a cup of water and handed it to Anna, whose mouth had gone dry with tension, then met the foreman's eyes. Before any work starts, basic conditions have to be met, he said. Right now they are not. Solve safety first, then talk about everything else. Ditch work is not happening today. Jones stared, chest heaving. Finally, he slammed his fist into the doorframe and stormed out, splashing away into mud. Anna drank with a trembling hand. Miller's refusal had not been emotional. It had been built on thresholds, traction, current, unknown hazards. A hard line placed between bodies and accidents, indifferent to the argument called necessity. For the first time, Anna understood how a rule could feel cold and still be the thinnest armor a person had. Miller returned to his clipboard and wrote for several minutes, noting the conditions and the decision the way he noted temperatures and inventory. Anna watched the pencil move. It was another kind of seal, one that could survive memory and argument. In that moment, she grasped that strictness could be mercy in disguise. It did not ask anyone to be good. It only required that they stop before the line where harm became likely. December came with Florida's damp cold, rain-tapping tin and scattered beets. On Christmas Eve, the camp had a thin wash of light. A kerosene lantern Miller hung in the medical shed, flame turned down small, glass cleaned. The glow could not drive out the darkness, but it softened the outlines of tin and plank. No ceremony, just the lamp and an early end to labor. Anna inventoried supplies. Only 3 clean bandage rolls remained. She looked at recent entries. Luigi, an Italian, deep cut to the right palm, sutured. Hans, a German, leg abrasion ground full of grit. Carl, an Austrian, bruised little finger after a near miss with a rolling log. Behind the ink were faces, the effort of work, the sharp smell of disinfectant that never fully drove away blood. Almost without hesitation, she set 2 bandage rolls aside for the cutting and lumber teams, the work most likely to produce deep slices. The last roll she returned to the box. Then she resealed the clasp with a fresh red X and wrote 44-12-24. Only after she wrote it did she realize the standard guiding her hand had been need and risk, not nationality or side. The realization did not come with pride. It came like a small crack opening in a wall that had held for years. She traced the red tape once with a fingertip and felt, mixed with calm, a thin, uneasy edge. If the standard changed here, in this swamp, what else had she been wrong to treat as fixed? That night she listened to the lantern's faint hiss and the rain tapping the roof, and realized that her fear had changed shape. It was no longer the fear of being struck or mocked. It was the fear of failing a standard she could not argue with, a standard that asked every day whether she had done the necessary things cleanly and completely. Winter passed in broken spells of cold rain. Spring, 1945, brought warmer air and thicker swamp steam. One day in April, the camp atmosphere shifted. A few blurred bulletins were passed from hand to hand and reclaimed. An officer read restrained updates about Europe, advance encirclement, resistance weakening. Everyone understood what the words pointed toward. That night rain returned, dense and patient, the sound on tin less like a clock than a small hammer driving time deeper into something thick. Anna was on night duty, registry open, ink bottle uncapped. After checking men resting with stomach illness, she returned to the table and wrote the date, 45-04-12. Then she stopped. A faint cheer rose far away, blurred by rain and swamp, as if even joy had to pass through water and mud before it could reach them. She reached for blotting paper and pressed it over the date. When she lifted her hand, she saw she had pressed harder than usual. The fingerprint stain at the edge was deeper, the whorls sharper, as if cut into the fibers. In the swamp, she recorded headaches, fevers, cuts, snake bites. She sealed tape, distributed salt, inspected knots. It was careful and exact, a strange kind of responsibility. But out there, behind those bulletins, what had her former recording and obedience meant. In rear hospitals, she had written names and numbers and followed orders without asking where the machine was going, what it was grinding beneath it. Disinfectant never fully covered the smell of blood and rot. Beds filled and emptied. Lists were signed and filed. She had told herself her job was to keep hands moving and eyes down, to do what procedure required, nothing more. Here, procedure felt different. It demanded attention. It demanded a signature and a date. It demanded that a risk be named, measured, and faced. And yet the question came anyway, late and sharp, whether silence, doing procedures perfectly while refusing to face the larger question, could still be a form of participation. The thought crawled up her spine like cold water. She could not mark this kind of participation with red tape. She could not seal it and put it in a file. In early May, the definite news broke through. The war in Europe was over. The announcement was brief, but its words changed. The camp did not erupt. What spread instead was a vacuum bewilderment. Labor paused for a day. People stood outside sheds and stared at mud and an ash-colored sky. Some wept quietly, some kept checking their tools as if the familiar weight were the only real thing left. The next morning, Miller opened the medical shed as usual, checked the seal, broke it, counted supplies, and posted a notice beside the malaria card in German, Italian, and English. Health checks, disease control, and injury procedures continued as normal. War's end did not end sanitation and safety protocol. That afternoon, a young man with flushed cheeks and a borderline fever was marked yellow and excused to the rest shed for observation. Salt distribution and net inspections continued. The schedule shifted around a new world, but the routines held the same way a knot held if it was tied properly. A few days later at assembly, the security lieutenant said, "The war is over. Management responsibility is not. You remain under military control regulations. Your health, safety, and disposition will be handled under established procedures and rules. Peace does not erase the past, and it does not solve the future." The next phase shifts from guns to documents, forms, hearings, and court procedures. Anna listened and glanced toward the medical shed. Miller stood with his clipboard, writing, procedure, forms. She would remember that color not as suspicion, but as the opposite, a minimal, durable confirmation of treating a person as a person, even an enemy, even a prisoner, enforced by records and traceable responsibility. Later, Anna did go on to be a nurse. The first rules she taught trainees were not complex techniques, but plain starts. With any patient, first check hydration and offer water. With any wound, first disinfect thoroughly. With any action, first make the record, sign your name, write the time. Some called her rigid. She never explained. Only she knew what kind of swamp had taught her that these basic rules could be the last barrier protecting life and dignity, and that the phrase hydrate first, then talk could steer a whole life like a compass that would not rust.